and welcome folks to the June 28th joint food ontology discussion group. And I would say first that if anybody wants to bring something else to the agenda, I'll just drop the agenda doc into the link. And then, let's see, bring that shut up. Okay, good. So got the agenda open, zipping down to the call. I'm recording it, so we'll add the video for those who couldn't make it. Right, so Michaela just mentioned that there's a workshop going on in the fall and that she's actually trying to attract some master's or PhD students as well. So she has a listing there, the fall robotics course, but I think there's also a call out for the position details that she can send us. Okay, so the first thing then I'd like to cover, I'm just going to do this in the slideshow that they presented last week to our own in-house group for feedback. So I'm going to share onto Fudon mission statement. Okay, so the show is all about getting a little more organized about Fudon development strategy in the coming year and getting our priority feedback from people. And it begins with the discussion of this mission statement, trying to achieve a few goals here. The first one was the lingua, that we would like Fudon to be the lingua franca of human and companion animal food product vocabularies. And so what this is hitting on is that we're trying to avoid taking on the whole agricultural livestock, animal husbandry, food system. And part of the reason is that there's a good Feedopedia resource out there that seems to do a good job of that. So I'm going to read through these other two and then get feedback from you guys. Okay. So the other thing is that we realize that the Fudon's main strength is that it's operating as a vocabulary in this sort of demilitarized zone between government agencies and corporations. So as an open source interagency supported project, it provides a neutral and ontology driven standard for government agencies, industry, nonprofits, and consumers to name and reference food products and their components throughout the food supply chain. Now, there is discussion about how to specialize this, and I was just talking with Matthew about, for example, if the American fermentation associations users can develop a OboFoundry level curational team skill and dedication that possibly we could peel off a fermentation part of the vocabulary to mini projects like that. But that aside, we would want to be the umbrella that can cover all of this vocabulary. And then the next level is that in partnership with other ontologies, the project also explores the semantic bedrock of vocabulary involved in modeling food composition, food processing, nutrition, and food-related disease. So this is introducing the word modeling and talking about these design patterns and micro-published little statements about food and how to do that in a harmonized fashion. So with that, I think I throw it out to you folks to comment on whether this is too ambitious, not ambitious enough, or I've missed something. Matthew, please.
I think it's great that you have a mission statement. I would suggest that I'd like to chew on it for a little while. I did notice, the human and companion animal, like you said, compared to livestock, but what the food that livestock eats is called feed. It's not called food. So maybe there'll be a feed on at some point, but so that's one comment. I think I'm not sure about that last paragraph, whether you want to specifically state ontological modeling of food composition, food processing, nutrition, and food-related disease. To be a little bit more specific about the type of modeling that is happening. That would be just sort of one of my knee-jerk comments, but I would like to be able to study this and think about it more, to be able to read it, 20 times.
Right.
And think it over, and but those are just my knee-jerk comments.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, companion animal was a little tricky in my case, do I say pets?
I think that's right on. That's the right term.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's great.
Okay. Okay, others. Diane. I don't touch here on food industry, for example, trying to describe food industry actors. So obviously there are other ontologies that need to be used to cover the whole activity
Food
space,
systems,
food sheds.
Right.
Yeah, I think this is fine for your current use and intention.
Graham, comment.
Yes, I'm just looking at this and thinking you're talking about the products and components, but not the processes. And my understanding was Fudon covered process in some depth.
Right. So I just alluded to it briefly. Oh, sorry.
Yes. Okay. But I'm thinking the second paragraph, because it's not just also. I thought processes themselves were integral to Fudon. Maybe I've misunderstood.
Oh, they are in my book.
Yeah, exactly. So I think,
okay,
that makes more sense to me.
Okay, I would put that. Yeah,
it's the transformation from through the supply chain.
Right.
And my understanding is that's all processes, from harvest to cooking.
Right.
I assume even chewing.
Yes, and to the extent that starts to percolate down into sub-ontologies. Yeah. Okay, great.
Just one other thing is in terms of other aspects, and it may be it comes with the components, but it's the I'm trying to think of the word. It's early in the morning here. The sensory aspects, the non-nutritious aspects. Do you cover that kind of vocabulary?
Not really.
The texture and the hedonistic value and so forth.
Right. Yeah, we've kind of been waiting for somebody to come along, and I know Matthew knows somebody who's totally interested in that part. I think his name is on our distribution list. The chef.
Okay, so that would be Robert Danhai.
Yes.
And we were actually just looking at my stab that I took a few years ago at a flavor and organoleptics related to food. I do think they are important. I'm not sure whether they actually belong in Fudon, quite frankly, because perfumes have aromas. There are lots of things that I think we would want a sensory ontology proper that Fudon would link to for those kinds of things. And you get haptic feedback from your phone. I mean, so a sensory ontology can actually be used in lots of different ways that aren't necessarily related to food. There could be ties to that within Fudon, but I'm not sure that we would want that to live inside of Fudon. And in fact, Chase O, who's on the call, I think is hiding out representing Chef Danhai right now.
Okay.
Not quite hiding out, but very much happy to be here.
Yeah. So that's definitely something that's coming along. I do think, though, you have nutrition well, the bottom part is in partnership with other ontologies. So maybe that organoleptic part lives and sensory part lives down in that down there near nutrition. And I think nutrition probably also looking at this now, or sensory science or food and its sensory properties or something like that. I think sensory properties might be more appropriate. Food processing, nutrition, and food-related disease. One thing, and this is where, chewing on it for a little bit of time. So we don't just want to look at nutrition, food-related diseases, and that could be read two ways. That could be a disease of wheat, or so is that food consumption? But health. Yes, that's exactly where I was going. You read my mind.
I'm remembering certain past efforts.
Of that's one of my soapboxes that I get up on is that we should be quantifying various states of health as a result of what we want to get out of life and what we want to do, and those could be correlated with disease. But I think I don't know about food related health, but food consumption patterns and related health outcomes maybe.
Yeah, I get your drift.
But I don't know that since that's in partnership with other ontologies, I think it needs to be part of the consumption patterns.
Okay, how about diet, nutrition, and food related health? Because diet is really covering those patterns of
Maybe.
I know we have dietary pattern, but the ONS folks were realizing that actually it's still too difficult to pick apart the two. So they were trying to consolidate them back again together.
Those are actually terms that we need to ontologize.
Well, they made an effort, and yes, I agree. All of this stuff should be revisited, and that is one of the things they want.
I should go back and look at the one.
Yeah.
The ONE. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. ONS. Sorry, not ONS.
ONS.
Yeah.
The ONE is the experimentation one.
It's the more document part. Nutritional studies document structure for text mining basically motivated that one. Okay, other comments on the mission? All right, well then I will move on to kind of what's happened in terms of strategy, looking back in the last few years. So what I realize has happened is that we've spent a fair bit of time on this first phase of basic modeling of food entities, and kind of came up with this issue that we're actually trying to accommodate multiple users of the vocabulary. And this stems from the multi-agency use of the vocabulary and from a government perspective, and also driven by academic research. And it's teased out that there's basically a need for minimum informatics in reference to food. So this means you can have a biosample come in and somebody somewhere down the line said pig. And They didn't mean that the biosample was a pig. They meant that the biosample came from a pig. But you don't actually know what the status of that pig was. It could be alive or dead. So we need to be able to reference the word pig with minimum implication. So basically, it just comes down to biosample derived from some pig taxon, whatever pig taxon is. And similarly for other kinds of food. And then, of course, with plants and animals, it starts to coalesce around plant and anatomy. So that's really been the effort in this first round, teasing apart that, and then realizing where we want to attach the synonyms for that basic reference. The same activity is going on with the food processes, trying to come up with the upper level hierarchy, and we will be reporting out on that a bit at JOWO 2022 with Trini's efforts. Yes, Matt, you.
So I'm just looking here. So how would I represent the difference between a waxed and an unwaxed apple in this schema?
Yeah, so that would be off of apple whole. Apple whole is a very vague reference. The apple could be on the tree. It might be ripe. It might be unripe. And then there are these other qualities.
Right, but I'm looking at apple whole raw there, second from the bottom, and
right.
It says it might be cleaned and or waxed. So are you saying that we don't necessarily have the ontological reference for whether it's been waxed or not?
So that italics is not its definition. I'm just throwing out that we don't know much about that apple. There's just a few elemental things we might know. So just to your question more specifically, I don't think Fudon has an apple waxed term, but if we did, we would put it under apple whole, probably raw, because.
And I know you just did a paper pest on. So do we have linkages, for instance, if the apple was sprayed with alar or some specific pesticide?
Yeah, so that's exposing right now debate within Obo Foundry about exposure ontologies, ecto and eco. And they have to sort out exactly what the relations are and what the micromodel is for being exposed to something. Lauren, if she was on the call, she'd be able to speak to that because she actually did the little model exposure in last year's Fudon Obo Foundry paper. So it's up to those exposure relations to be able to construct the sentences to describe that.
So your intention is, because the wax would then be an exposure also. So then is slicing an exposure, that I was exposed to a slicing process?
Slicing is certainly the output of a slicing process. And then I haven't delved into how one would want to model the exposure. I was kind of hoping that the exposure people would do that. So, but I am interested in all of the processes required for cooking. So we would try to take on determining the models around that.
Right. Okay. But the way you cook something may change depending on how that thing has been treated before it got to your kitchen, sort of thing.
Yeah, input states dynamically creating choice of processes and which ones meet the criterion and all of that. Totally into all of that.
And just out of curiosity, do we have a ripe versus unripe?
Yeah, there's a gradation there for.
Yeah, I thought we did. I just couldn't remember.
Yeah, I do. With all of this, the other background plan is to really help improve the documentation on each little concept area within Fudon on the website, so that you can look up such questions and answers easily. Right now, that particular information is buried in the facet menu on the website.
Okay.
Okay, other comments about this basic modeling phase? Graham.
sorry to sort of jump in with a bit of detail, but
No.
for that kind of situation where you mentioned there are gradations of ripeness, do you actually explicitly provide the vocabulary for each of those, for each type of food, or do you provide a framework for people to record it?
Yeah.
No, on a continuous scale or no, local scale,
Mhm.
because there are obviously different systems used at by different players on how to score something such as apple ripeness.
Right. Yes. All of these areas can be modeled as you go in towards industry in a much more particular fashion. And the upper level categories that one might have started out with in Fudon might look primitive by the time you're a month into it. So I realize that a number of our categorical menus may have to change and evolve as
Okay.
So this,
And so I think the question I realize that I'm trying to ask is, do you provide a vocabulary framework for quantitative data or information, which isn't necessarily a qualitative scale?
Yeah, well, plant phenotype ontologies, of course, are trying to tackle that space, but they may not touch ripeness because it's so close to an end product kind of judgment. So yeah, so the way we would want to handle such a query as yours is if there's a user involved with the stakes in that question, to have them open up a GitHub issue or bring it up in the monthly call.
just one,
It's really very important for a whole lot of agricultural plant science and consumer science is having something reasonably flexible for the quality continuous scale area.
That might be something we'd want to.
Across food, and even then to compare food, if you're comparing some properties following a process.
And that might be actually something we could use some explanatory text around the mission statement to tease out, because we are trying to be a lingua franca, and yet we may not be able to meet the needs of research projects in specific areas.
But sorry, I'm not just talking about research projects. I'm talking as a farmer, where products that we sell are graded, and they're graded by the industry. And some of these things are on continuous scale, and some are not on continuous scale.
Mm-hmm. And legislation and region and trading partner specific standards. Yeah, I'm going to be getting more personal experience in that, because I believe a Pulse program, Yellow P Pulse standardization program, data collection is going to happen in the next year for us on the Fudon side. So we'll test the waters in terms of all of that.
Yep. Okay, cool. Thanks.
just one quick note I can't let go looking at this screen.
Yep.
That maturity and ripeness are two different things.
Okay, hit me.
So,
Tell me all about it.
Maturity is growth state, and ripeness is moving towards decay, essentially. And so you could have an immature flower or banana that becomes ripe to eat because it's reached a certain stage of decay, as a for instance. So they're not necessarily the same thing.
So maturity, I see. So if the class is degree of plant maturity, then the words ripe don't fit too well in that whole list. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I'm saying they're two different things. They can be correlated, and they often are, but they're
But the other thing is you've got the term plant, and many of the things below wouldn't necessarily relate to the whole plant. if no, it's not. It could be the fruit on the plant is overripe, but the roots are going to last another 100 years.
Very good point. Thank you. I will I will revisit that. I totally agree with you on that.
Damion was
Yeah,
not.
there may be
acting
some
on
things
the
in
whole
plant
stuff.
ontology that would help that out.
Yeah. One thing I can say about this job, it makes you eternally humble.
Poking holes, poking holes.
For all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some of this was actually from Langual, so it's actually a reevaluation of Langual's scheme. Yeah, I think actually they just had riper mature and unripe or immature, and then we popped in those other two. Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So back to the slide. So then the next level of modeling kind of depends on having the terms in place. And now we're getting into the process modeling of those terms. This is where terms suddenly start, you know, I feel like suddenly all the little blocks start getting organized because of the principle of processes tying them together. So that was just an example of the modeling. And then another one here. So this particular slide, whereas this one is entirely within the Fudon domain in terms of all the kinds of things going on. Maybe some of the devices for crushing are more generic in the food industry, but this slide explores the fact that we're reusing relations from the rest of Obo Foundry in this language to create sentences about recipes and the processes involved, the devices and all of that. And that's a point I want to make across better in Fudon to approach this lingua franca vision. So any comments about that second tier process modeling ambition?
I just would like to say that this is a food processing process modeling. It's not necessarily food production process modeling, right? So I think we just need to be careful with the words there. That's all.
Okay, yeah, I want to be sensitive to not getting stuff confused that might be industry specific, but this lingua franca vision is trying to reuse the same language if it entails the same thing across disciplines and levels of operation. So if the difference between an industrial and a home oak kitchen process involves different devices or more layers of planned processing or feedback devices and automated devices, I'm still expecting the language to stay the same.
No, that's not what I was saying.
Okay.
I agree with you, except that, you know, it wouldn't be called a recipe at the industrial level. It would be called a formula.
Mhm.
That's the only main difference I see there. No, what I was saying was there are other process models for food, like related to food production. That's the growing of food, the harvesting of food. That's a different. And so what I was saying is this is a food processing process model, not a food production process model. And we need to, not a food harvest process model, right?
Yeah.
So we need to be quite clear about that. And ultimately, you know, I guess there's going to be each one of those kinds of things, and they're going to be slightly different from each other.
Mhm. Right. Interestingly, if we took a lens to harvesting, would you just have to change the devices, the objectives, the actions, and this is the part that would drop away, and instead you would have inputs. So that's sort of arguing for a more generic model that has.
A more generic term instead of ingredient it would just be input specification, and that could be ingredient could be one type of input. Pesticides could be another type of input, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a side FoodOn issue about ingredients and how to define them.
Right.
To apply to paint as well as recipes and so on. So, okay, great. Others. You see, this is Jello. Actually, this is sat around for 6 months, so I aim actually in the next week to create these terms that have dashes around them because they're not in FoodOn yet. I was waiting for OB feedback and so on. Okay, Graham.
Just a question about, you've used the term measurement datum. And we spent quite a bit of time thinking about what that word should be in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
It seems quite reasonable, but there may be more than one actual data point in a record. So we've adopted provisionally the word recorded value. And it also means that a measurement datum is when you've actually measured something. Sometimes you may just inherit the value, the recorded value from elsewhere, from a scale or something. It seems trivial, but actually it's quite important what language you use around measurement.
Yeah.
And data. And it's really strange. We've looked through, Lily looked through a whole lot of different ontologies, and it's really difficult to find a definition of a datum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we, as I said, we've used recorded value. I don't know if Lily, you want to say anything else about that, but
right.
Is that fixed what you have? And have you inherited it from BFO or something?
Certainly have through IAO measurement datum, and their old realist ontology thing was that there should be truth sitting in that measurement datum because it's a data item about something. So you couldn't have. So then we were caught into this whole discussion of simulated data, predicted data. How can there be truth in that when those are just like in the future, or they never existed in the first place? So I wish they would just junk that whole realist angle and just look at representation, whether it's of unicorns or narwhals, But observation seems to me to be a lingering term that's related to this, and the PO2 folks wanted observation. Because an observation implies with it a time of observation, a place of observation, a thing of being observed. So it's kind of a standalone unit, whereas measurement datum doesn't necessarily carry a time of measurement and so on.
I agree with all those points. It's just, I think there's something different from an observation and a recorded value. We some years ago, we did experiments sending people out, and 2 people at a time out into a field to record values. One person did the observation, the other person wrote it down. Mm-hmm. And then we looked for consistency, and we found noise because people weren't paying attention in their recording. So what you actually have in front of you is a recorded value. It doesn't necessarily reflect the observation. That's the logical point. So that there are 2 things. The actual data you look at is what's recorded.
Right. Okay.
You get error.
There's always something. There's always something between the ink on the paper or the iPod and what was there out in the world, whether it's a device or a human eyeball. Okay. Well, I don't think I'm going to move on that particular thing. Just that everything is recorded, but whether it's the theory of whether it was a measurement or if we allow measurements to be imperfect and full of human foible, then I think we're still on the same page. Yeah.
I
Oh.
just want to say that I think what we were like, or just having issues with was, measurement can be understanding, or like we can understand that measurement is like a process, or it can be like a recorded value in this case. So that's when we were just thinking like maybe just try to find a different term will be better, because like that that specific word
Right.
could make it difficult to define, I think, in general. But we have we have like a full presentation with some research that I did about that specific term. So we can at some point also like try to mention it in here, or like I was thinking that maybe in this in September for the Michigan workflow workshop as well.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but like I think there is an issue there as well, that it needs a bit more detail in try to understand and try to get to one specific term.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, right. Measurement as a word on its own can either be a process or a noun.
Is
So I
it
get
a verb or a noun? Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I love the idea of interjecting that into the September workshop on agricultural measurement of variables and in the field and so on. Okay, so moving on. So the next phase for Fudon, now that we've got all the basic modeling and got deep into the process modeling on this, is to start up this mapping phase. And this brings us fruits of this lingua franca vision. So first ambition, most 2/3 of the way through, USDA Food Data Central mapping of the single ingredient foods, SR Legacy and Foundation. And as well, partner on the Periodic Table of Food Initiative, which is doing ultra spectroscopy. I'm always getting spectroscopy and the spectroscopy. That's the one where you're beaming lasers at the stuff and getting back the frequency spectrum analysis. Is that right? Spectrometry? No, ultraspectrometry. Is that it?
Spectroscopy is when you're actually looking at something.
You got the lens. Okay, spectronomy.
Yeah,
right.
Spectrometry. Yeah.
Okay.
And in the lab, you just say mass spec or whatever.
Mass spec. Maybe that's my solution to my dyslexia. Mass spec. Okay. So mass spec. So they're doing mass spec and they are working their way through hundreds of samples. And it's a multi-year project, I'm sure. So Fudon's the backbone of that. Sample description. Upcoming EFSA FoodX2, that's our next mission. And that's about 4,000 terms. And then these remaining mapping terms should be easier to accomplish because we're doing most of the correcting for the base plant times animal, plant times plant part times plant and animal part times animal groundwork now for SR Legacy, and we're just expecting that those terms will already exist then when we come to these final 3 mapping projects. In AgriVoc, I'd wanted to map just for the multilingual synonymy, but I'm hearing now that that's a bit more unreliable. A bit of it's machine generated, but at least we can map to the AgriVoc food terms themselves. Okay, so then that takes us to just mentioning the partner projects. So CDNO is pretty prominent there. And expecting to finally be able to start providing sort of the pure ontological model of food composition times nutrient measure. Oh, did I say measure? Recorded value. And then that ties in well with Wiki FCD's mission, which is to get food composition information collected directly and provide the free software for the developing nations to do this, having it backed up by Fudon IDs and also by nutrients described not just by the in-foods tags, but by CDNO mapping terms. Then as well, we're getting into the agricultural sector. This National Microbiome Data Collaborative Soil Microbiome Standards is using Data Harmonizer, which is another tool we've developed and expect to be using for spreadsheet data collection of all sorts of biosample related, whether it's food or other disease sample collection. And this one ties into the agricultural target, which is part of the September US2TS workshop. And then pesticide ontology, so indirectly related to food. And as Matthew pointed out, now we get into like exposures. How do we document all of that? And then this Pulse Industry Canada Yellow Pea prototype project, which I'm pretty sure will fly. And then we've already done this ISO standard around collecting information around foodborne pathogen metadata samples, sample metadata. And then lastly, the Cornell Food Safety Biosample Project has really taken us into trying to describe the industry components of food processing plants and where they're taking samples from for possible contamination analysis, AMR and all the works. So that explains what we've got going. And I guess the lessons learned from it all are that I would say the Joint Food Ontology Discussion Group has really been a key to our success. So I thank you all because it's offered so many different viewpoints on the need and demands of the language to make it multi-purpose. It's allowed us to sort of help with each other's patterns, establishing them in the ontologies. It's, I would say, through the Obo Foundry demand list of RO relations and singular terms and so on that we're really helping quality control, not just within Fudon, but within the community of ontologies. And then it's also hand in hand with training, evolution of our training and skill sets. So that's the end of what I wanted to say. And now it's over to you guys to tell me, I think, in terms of ambition and priority, what you need to see on the list or want to see. And of course, you can just send me an email on the side if you want. But if if I miss something glaring, you know, there's a decisive conference deciding everything about food ontologies and mapping and some competition. Let me know.
So you mentioned at the beginning about the sort of role of sitting between industry and government. I'm just interested, do you have any feel or able to track statistics of use pickup by industry? How what impact the availability of Fudon terminology is having in the food industry, or likely to have?
Mhm. I'm guessing it's not really established, but it's a big zero. Yeah, I don't have any
Yeah.
idea.
So I'm just wondering if there's because something I'm more generally interested in is a strategy for how to then engage and find ways of having demonstration projects to increase the pickup.
Yeah, that reminds me of one thing, which is being able to go to a database or search online for a Fudon term and then start to see where it's showing up. So we can start to see that showing up in NCBI biosample databases. People through Genome Tracker project are putting in Fudon IDs relative to the samples. And so it might start to be a process of monitoring particular databases for their quantity of usage. It's also about breaking into the Onto Commons, for example, in Europe. Projects like that are really trying to tout the fair data standards, and various people in them are interested in Fudon as that kind of a reference. That's a big help. USDA, I can thank Kyle and the company for popping Fudon IDs for the foundation foods in there that have been mapped so far. And then with the other SR legacy ones coming, that'll be a big boon. So yeah, I was sort of expecting a process of getting the mapping done and then going to see, then with that in place, then that becomes the argument for industry to take it on. Otherwise, they don't really have, what's Fudon mapped to? How do I get from North America to Europe right now? There's no way, because there's no mapping between EFSA and SR legacy, for example, that I know of. The one thing that I didn't talk about here is governance. The notion that Fudon would be a nonprofit at some point, and it's partly because I've just not been coming from an upper level management type of person. I've been sort of ground level, just getting the engineering right. I'm Scotty, Scotty on the enterprise. So it's going to take a different kind of person, I think, to bring in the organizational mandate to go nonprofit, which seems to be the best way to go to incorporate the interests of many agencies instead of just one. So it's kind of like I'm keeping my eye out for that, and I was kind of hoping that Foundry would get their organizational momentum to create the nonprofit, and then knowing that takes time. As
You mean at OVO as an umbrella or for Fudon?
An umbrella,
Yeah.
And I've just mentioned to Diane that the thing about OVO Foundry is that it's driven by a bunch of researchers who have innovate for language development, and they can intellectually see the solutions on the horizon. But most of them don't have connections with friendly ears and upper management that are willing to fund the whole drive towards a nonprofit. At least that's the impression I've got.
Yeah, because it does need, quote, startup money, because you don't want to dip your toe into it without at least a part-time lawyer, accountant, and someone to actually run it. That's that's the big thing is everybody has these other jobs. So if you're looking within the community itself, than to quote have the one person who's going to work for free for a while, besides me, no, um, to actually push this forward and find all those resources and then get actual startup money, which is kind of a chicken and egg because we don't have a checking account because we're not a nonprofit. And then, you know, it would just take somebody actually investing some startup money to actually hire the small team, you know, some of them part-time, but, you know, probably 2 full-time people, and then access to part-time use of a lawyer and accountant, and because you have to do various filings in different, you know, countries and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so it's interesting because like Obo Foundry's got at least 6 or 7 national and level labs represented on it, which are big institutions.
Right.
So you know that these organizations do have pluck and could, at the drop of a hat, fund 1 or 2 people to do this kind of stuff. But the allies somehow have not been established there. The tugging on ears for that. And so I expect that it will happen because there's nothing terribly wrong with Obo Foundry. I know governance was invoked, governance working group was invoked to help with some interpersonal issues around they weren't being heard. I don't know any of the
that are everywhere. The same is they're in tennis groups and church committees and every single form of human interaction. So, you know, but some of it is that you're invoking people who, have a research or full-time plus academic job. And then part of it was, well, I felt ignored. And it's like, because nobody's paying anybody to do full-time work to attend to certain things. So, you know, and then some people might be maybe short or brief because they don't have time. And, you know, literally don't have time, and it's not their gig. So yeah, it's interesting. But it's kind of one of those chicken and egg things.
So just in terms of CIDCO, our own lab and operations, we are funding like at least, I would say it must be like at least 300 grand we're spending yearly on or 400, I don't know, on ontology and data interoperability and harmonization, maybe more if you count everything we've thrown at COVID in the last couple of years. So I am kind of hoping that a threshold of expertise and funding will happen in our lab, we're certainly on that curve, that could step forward, maybe not for Obo Foundry, but for Fudon to create that nonprofit vision.
Yeah, because I think it might just be that some of these individual ontologies go that route, and then there would be some maybe overarching administrative things where Obo itself. But yeah, I think that's probably a natural path, is that you start to build up some nonprofits in the various ontologies.
And Matthew, of course, with IC Foods, has just become a nonprofit in the last 2 months, I think, officially through USD.
So you might know the process better.
Yeah, right. I was just to say he's not
or somebody he knows will know the process better.
Involved, but
yeah, it might not be Matthew himself, but he probably knows who knows.
So I'm just trying to understand the scope. Are you saying for Fudon or Fudon and related ontologies? Because I can see value of a cluster that's covering a particular area, and certainly with CDNO, we want to make sure that keeps going. But there are other areas in the agricultural arenas where there's some governance around, for instance, the crop ontology, and I'm involved in the governance of that, as is Lily on the scientific committee. But there's something larger than that, because that's very focused on production. But no, I'm involved in DivSeek, which is a not-for-profit, and it's registered in Canada. incorporated in Canada as a company there, and it was set up by funds from Genome Canada and Genome Prairie with the Global Institute of Food Security, for instance. So that's an example. And that's been running about 2.5 years now. So I'm the executive director. So nominally I work in Saskatoon, and thankfully don't. I couldn't cope with a cold. So I just think that there's opportunity to see, are there some clusters of activities which could come under an umbrella, not for profit, and benefit from, I don't know, all the sort of infrastructure that you mentioned, Diane, that is required. I mean, we, as a not-for-profit, we at the moment make use of the partnership with GIFS, or the Global Institute of Food Security, and like that type of thing may be of interest for Fudon as well.
I see. Yeah, that sounds interesting. Yeah, I'd like to hear more about that. Matthew as well had a vision for an umbrella supporting various food system ontologies. And so the reason why I focused on Obo Foundry is just because that structure is providing the interoperability through the life science space. But they don't, I admit, they don't seem that comfortable with taking on, because nobody's there with the time or the mandate to go get into more of an industry focused thing. Meanwhile,
I mean, the general area, now my job at the moment with DivSeek is to find funding either from the public sector or foundations. And it seems to me the people to speak to are the parts of government that are funding infrastructure already, particularly in the bio area. And if you look in the sort of human medical clinical area, there's a lot of infrastructure investment that doesn't necessarily spill over into practical things like food and nutrition, but could do, and it could be harnessed. And so I think there's opportunity. No, and governments always want to see, more fundamental efforts and things like standards and so forth, see practical use. So having public-private partnerships, but you need the governance infrastructure for that to keep continuity. So one approach is to simultaneously go to several governments, say within the G7, and put a proposal to the key people who are funding the infrastructure in the bio area and say, look, we've got a concept here. We think we've got a good strategic plan, as you have there for Fudon. And would you be prepared to chip in on the basis that by contributing a small amount to the running of this international body, you're actually going to get back a huge amount of return to your national interest. And it's worth a try, rather than just starting in one place and hoping that people come along.
Right. And I presume that provides a more secure funding situation, because, I mean, from the respect that governments and nonprofits are always wondering about whether the program, their own contribution will dry up a year later.
That's right. So it's like spread betting. And to me, there's been a good example with the wheat initiative, which grew out of the International Wheat Genome Sequencing Consortium. I probably got the words wrong in that one. But no, they've got some continuity, and they've got investment from several countries, and I think some industrial investment coming into them. And it gives continuity to spend on infrastructure initiatives and so forth.
Okay, cool. I'm all ears, and
so I'm happy to discuss this further, or throw in some ideas, or make introductions to people I'm speaking to. on behalf of DivSeek as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and probably part of that is reinforcing within our little community on our monthly calls how we're seeing those interagency and intergovernmental projects succeed with respect to this ontology vocabulary.
Yeah, and the key thing is that you've got a great track record of consultation in these meetings and others, and outreach, and
Right.
that's what they want to see. That they're not just going to go and fund one lab.
Yeah, well,
for that kind of effort.
I see. Yeah. I can't say I'm a natural born facilitator, but what I certainly have enjoyed is all sorts of people coming to the table and offering their worlds into this. Yeah. Okay. Well, with that said, let's close this month's joint call, and I'll send out the video and look forward to the next month, which I believe will be Michaela introducing a fair bit of her AI, robotics, and consumer-oriented food research. So thanks all for joining up. See you in a month.
Thanks, Damion.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you, Damian. Bye-bye.